Yo, how are you doing, folks? Welcome to episode 35 of the Simpa Life podcast with me, Simpa Carter, and my co-host and cohort, Mr. Maga. How are you today, sir?
Is it 35? I thought it was 34. Don't do a double check
it's
there
35.
while I try and dig you out of a hole. All right, we'll go with 35 then. Yeah, I'm good, mate. I'm absolutely shattered from the week as per usual, but I am happy that the Euros are on the telly, even if they are a year late. Although, having said that, I was absolutely fucking traumatized when I was watching the
Denmark game.
Chapter the Denmark game. Jesus Christ! Actually, seeing that live when he just dropped, it shook me for the rest of the day, to be quite honest about it. But other than that, I'm glad he's alive. Let's put it that way. Let's just say seeing chest compressions and cardiac defibrillators, can't say it. Fuck it. Those kinds of devices. It's not pleasant to be seen. It's probably even worse if you're in the stadium, to be honest. But look, at the end of the day, I'm glad he's awake. Anyway, back over to you. There you go.
He seems to be doing well. A lightheartedness to start the podcast there, folks. He does seem to be doing well from radio reports I've seen. I mean, this tells you how far of an impact that actually has. I don't really follow football, but that ended up in my sphere of sort of knowledge and ended up with a video on one of my feeds. And yeah, I agree. It was quite harrowing to witness. It was good that the officials and everyone around him knew what the hell they were doing and were able to actually sort of pull that together. This actually ties in quite nice with this week's podcast, who is Wrexham FC, a super fan, it would seem. He's also a former police inspectorate and former North Wales PCC from 2016 to 2015. He's Mr. Arfon Jones. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you. Yes, it's good to talk about the football. The Euros, and I would agree it was a very traumatic time to see what happened to Christian Eriksen, and I'm glad that he's awake and still in hospital, but I think they're in the process of finding out what went on, and I'd just like to wish him all the best, the same as everybody else. I think there's a lot of sympathy towards him, and quite rightly so.
Yeah, indeed. Football is one of those sports you don't really ever expect to see that level of sort of emergency intervention. You wouldn't really expect to see it.
No.
Yeah, it's good that they did have the professionals on hand, like we say, to be able to facilitate and deal with that. I mean, I do applaud that. I do have kind of a bit of a grievance with the BBC maybe for continuing its broadcast of it, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, they apologise now, haven't they?
Yeah, they have.
Well, it's good that they have issued an apology.
And there's something to be said. I mean, if you're going to give the person on the end of the camera the benefit of the doubt, it was shocking. You probably didn't know his arse, or if it was assuming it was a he. Let's not assume genders. The person on the end of the camera, you probably didn't know their arse from their elbow at that point, because I didn't. My jaw hit the floor. I couldn't believe what was happening. I didn't know whether to come to stand up, sit down, go and tell the missus what's actually happened. So I mean, if there was a conscious decision to keep the camera on it, then it's apparent. But I mean, if you want to sort of look at the positive there and just sort of give the benefit of the doubt in this regard, I think, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it'll be more. No, I think it'll be more naivety or the continuation of job. That guy's job is to follow something that moves high speed. They've got to be constantly aware of what's going on. So then at that point, they're just following the action, as it were. So you can imagine they're not really going to engage with that experience until afterwards.
Yeah, haunting anyway, to say the least.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll leave that there and get on with sort of the original questions that I wanted to ask our guests today. So I suppose the first question really often is, how did you first become involved in the police force?
Well, I joined the police back in 1978, and I did 30 years, retired in 2008. When I joined, it was all cannabis, joints and hippies, And over time, you just become aware of, the guys that we locked up back in the 70s, and the 80s. What harm did they do to anybody?
Yeah.
And I think that is what it boils down to. I think policing and law enforcement should be around harm to individuals, particularly vulnerable individuals. and obviously, it's up to adults to decide themselves if they wish to take any substances, the same as it is if I want to consume alcohol. Obviously, got to draw the line with children. So and that is why we need regulation of drugs, really, because at the moment there is no regulation. There is nothing stopping children acquiring controlled substances, which clearly harms them. The same as alcohol harms them. You start consuming alcohol when you're 12, it's going to harm you just as much as smoking cannabis will do at 12. I don't see the difference between regulated and unregulated drugs.
I suppose it's access, really, I guess, is the difference. I mean, even if we look at, say, how alcohol and tobacco are regulated, it's taken us a very long time to catch up, and there are still some quite archaic parts of the legislation. So if you look at how far they've gone with alcohol in terms of packaging restrictions and advertising, moved it up from a 16 to an 18, and then compare that with alcohol, where it's still legal for a 5-year-old to drink in the home. The parent can provide a drug that is still registered as a neurological toxin. So it's weird that in some parts of our drug policy, as you say, we started with, I suppose, hippies and joints, and it was all soap bar, really hard, really quite low quality hashish, and then through the intervention of policing, it's as Neil Woods describes it, it's become an arms race. Yeah. Is this something that sort of you saw in your tenure?
Well, yeah, we didn't differentiate in strength of cannabis or any other drug. If we didn't know what it was and the person in possession of it didn't tell us what it was sent off for forensic analysis. He came back as it was heroin or cocaine or amphetamine, MDMA, whatever. But when it came to cannabis, it was cannabis or it wasn't really. So we didn't differentiate between the strength of it, but I was conscious of the fact it was getting stronger over the years. And he could say, really, couldn't he? If the UK had regulated cannabis 30, 40 years ago, similar to what it did in the Netherlands, would we have a problem with spice today? Yeah, and I think not, because if you got access to cannabis, the real thing, why would you want to do anything with some dangerous crap like spice, basically?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because spice has become, especially in prison populations, a replacement for people that initially start on cannabis, or that have the enjoyment of a 20 bag a week or something. So they'll just enjoy a couple of joints on an evening sort of style, that then can end up in dangerous positions where people go, well, this is similar. This has similar sort of effects, but because of the massively increased potency of the synthetic compounds, they have such detrimental neurological effects, they can become deadly. I mean, the stories that I've heard from friends that I know that work within the prison sector of sort of prisoners using dry kettles to put in sort of a kid's drawing that's been dipped in it and is then heated off the elements within the kettle, and they huff off the kettle. And the prisoners are like falling, banging their heads and stuff because of the extremity of the reaction. Whereas if they were then just sat in the cell smoking a little joint, it's a very, very different sort of reaction and ingestion method.
Well, I'll put it this way to you. I've never.
Well,
seen...
I did.
Sorry, go ahead, Arfon.
I did call for prisoners to be allowed to vape cannabis, because the vast majority, and I mean well over 50% of prisoners in our prison system are on some sort of Class A prescribed drugs, whether they're benzos or whatever. And it's obviously a lot safer for them to vape cannabis, and you're far more likely to reduce tensions within prison by allowing them to vape cannabis than you are by prescribing them benzos and all these other dangerous Class A prescribed drugs.
Yeah, it's things like sort of gabapentin and stuff like that that's now ended up being a scheduled drug because of exactly that mechanism within prison, that prison populations were introduced to them as a way to try and stop them smuggling in drugs and accessing illicit drugs, which quite often I can't remember where I've just seen it the other day, an investigation that sort of came out about corruption within police, within prison officers, and the sheer scale of it. I think it was Vice, actually. It was a Vice piece. And they broke down the cost of, say, getting in mobile phones into prison, getting in an ounce of weed, getting in an ounce of this. And yeah, so you can see how the system has tried to then go, okay, we'll use these regulated safe drugs as a means of keeping them away from this criminality. But that mentality on that micro population, we've seen how bad it goes. That when you then look at it at the larger culture, you can see why we're kind of fucked right now.
Yeah. The thing is, you look at how Class A drugs got into prisons in the first place. It's such a counterproductive thing to start testing, urine testing, prisoners in the prison system. And because cannabis stays so long in the system, to get around it, they started taking other substances. Mm-hmm. You know, the end result, 15% of people that are coming out of prison come out now with a drug addiction problem that didn't have when they went in. Oof. You know, it is, it's absolutely unbelievable how counterproductive penal reform. Well, it's not penal reform, just penal policy. Yeah,
it's just punishment. I mean, there is very little reform, it would seem, because exactly that. It's not identifying why is the reason you feel the need to take this substance. Why is it you feel that you cannot live without taking this substance, and identifying those root causes. Without that, all you're doing is warehousing them until you release them into the general population and expect them to not commit further criminality to support dependency.
Yeah. All prisons don't rehabilitate. All they do is contain a problem for a certain amount of time.
It's a sticky plaster, really, on the face of society, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a massive waste of money, and money that will be far better used to address underlying causes in the community. You know, like early intervention, adverse childhood experiences. If you took the prison population and you carried out an interview with a selection of them, I would guarantee that the vast majority of them there would have experienced 4 or more adverse childhood experiences in being brought up, which goes a long way towards explaining their criminality. I'm not saying, you know, it explains everything, but it does go a long way towards explaining it.
Yeah, if you look at the data, I mean, people like the work of Dr. Gabor Mate, a Hungarian psychiatrist that works out of Toronto, I think he's still based in, and he spent 20-30 years with homeless populations, intravenous drug users, who basically they called them treatment resistant, because no matter what they did, they went back to heroin. And it wasn't until they went, wait, shit, if we prescribe them, everything else fit in a place, that there is this mechanism that they identified that to the individual, that is medicine. That is no different than somebody who is diabetic. They take insulin, they get better. So they then have a dependency on the insulin. So in some people, the mechanism that is developed there to their brains is rational. You know what I mean? Because they've been maladapted through their early years of development, through the most informative years of your life. If you have, as you say, these adverse events between, I think it's like 6 months and 5 years, that's when you formulate interpersonal relations. That's when you formulate worldviews. Long before you have your linguistic skills, you have these concepts ingrained about how the world should be. And then when you have these juxtapositions with the reality that you're in, say, for example, you're told that drugs are bad, one drug will kill you, all drugs are terrible. You have a predisposition towards potentially dependency issues because of an absence of a father figure or some other form of love or connection, that when you then find these substances, they have for you such a visceral response. I think of, is it Maya Shulvitz, author out of New York, and she wrote of the first time she injected heroin was the first time she felt love. She felt this hug just wash over her. And she said, who in the world is going to take that from me, you know?
Yeah, well, Johan Hari sort of sums it all up very well in Chasing the Scream, really. And I know he quotes several of the people that you mentioned there. But no, it's quite right. You know, the rat park experiments and things like that proves the importance of the connection.
Yeah, well, for our audience that are not aware, Rat Park was Bruce K. Alexander, and he took on the experiment basically that was we had for the model of addiction for many years was they put a lot of rats in cages. They gave them either water and cocaine or other substances. And they went, the rats are taking the drugs, therefore they've got a serious problem with taking the drugs. What Bruce K. Alexander went, well, you've got to consider the social aspects of this. So he created a heaven space for them, as it were. There was food, there was mating opportunities, social opportunities. There was a natural hierarchy within their range. And what they found is the majority of rats interacted with the drugs, but they didn't then overuse them, or they would use them once and then leave them alone because their other needs were met. As Johan Hari said, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, the opposite of addiction is connection, social connections, interpersonal connections. I think that this body of evidence that is sort of come together over the past 50 years, I think really is now, it's almost butting heads with the moralizing aspect, which is one of the reasons I've really wanted to speak to you for quite a while, is as somebody who's been in through policing but speaks so eloquently of wanting to stand for victims of domestic abuse, victims of an archaic drug policy. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on what is happening with policing, the idea of police. How can the idea of policing fit with the Misuse of Drugs Act?
It doesn't, does it? The Misuse of Drugs Act is probably the biggest failure of legislation ever. You start off with less than 10,000 people who use heroin in 1971, and you end up with 250,000 today. Now that is what you call a massive failure of legislation. The Misuse of Drugs Act. How many careers has it destroyed? How many young people with cautions have failed to get into medical school and things like that. It's a massive destructive piece of legislation, and I suspect the government knows that, but they don't really know what to do about it. We keep on telling them what they need to do about it. And to be honest, we've been kicking at the Home Office door for a long time. And it is opening slowly, because there are signs of progress. They will allow us, they will grant licenses for heroin assisted treatment. They will allow drug testing of festivals. They have legislated for medical cannabis. Especially if you're one of the 6,000 can afford to buy the prescriptions, you're okay, but not if you're the 3 that can't.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere in the region of 1.4 to 1.7 million people that are eligible or should be able to access. But yeah, it's around 6,000 people that have thus far managed to obtain a prescription.
Yeah, the thing is, sort of drug policy, the same as many other, criminal policies, will target the more marginalized ethnic minorities. If you got money, then you'll get treatment. You can afford to buy treatment. You can afford your medicinal cannabis. If you do go to court, you'll more than likely not end up incarcerated, because, you're from a good home, you had a good education, your future is going to be jeopardized. But if you're from a poorer home, none of that counts.
Yeah, it's an interesting paradigm, isn't it? Yeah, exactly. You hit the nail on the head there. I've read it time after time. It's especially with college kids, that's so American, with university kids that are caught with a little bit of cocaine. The more prevalent the university, the more likely the judge is to say, well, these upstanding young men from good backgrounds and their potential future. And then you hear of exactly, they find somebody that they've been pestering time after time, they know is going to be in possession, who lives on the street in a local region, and they just pick him up when they need a quick little tick box. Yeah. It's the juxtaposition between this it's insane.
Yeah. If the Metropolitan Police stopped doing stop search on black kids in London, how much would knife crime reduce? Yeah. I think would have a massive impact on it. A knife crime in London and other cities are very, very closely related to cannabis use, in my opinion, and even more so now with county lines. And the violence around drug supply has just got more and more. When I was in the police, you didn't have this level of violence between dealers and users as you do today. So the more we introduce prohibition and enforcement, the more violent society becomes.
Yeah, I think that
it's not rocket science. There's an awful lot of research being done into this. The evidence is out there, but the Home Office just don't want to follow the evidence, do they?
Well, yeah, they've got an independent body to look at drug policy evidence. It's just a shame that they have both hands tied behind their back and a big bit of duct tape over their mouth.
Yeah,
it's an interesting one of the correlation between it, because exactly that. Sort of Neil Woods and J.S. Raffaelli's books, Good Cop, Bad War and Drug Wars, speak very eloquently of sort of the escalation through policing over the decades that has led to county lines. And it is an exploitation of the legislation. Then they go, okay, minors are less likely to get done. Under the current system, they're more likely to be viewed as vulnerable. Therefore, we can exploit them. The same with people that are then trafficked in. So, I mean, we have big issues around a lot of the north with Albanian and Lithuanian grow operations that are huge. They turn up in a region that's been self-sufficient for 3, 4, 5 years with maybe 6 or 7 dealers that know each other and actually buy from each other. So they keep each other going. And what they're dealing for is to get access for themselves, keep a bit of money on a bit of money in the bank, put food on the table, clothes on their kids' back, and keeps that local economy growing. These guys turn up with kilo boxes, 500-600 quid cheaper than everyone else, buy out the suppliers, get rid of and marginalize those dealers. So then they've got to fight to literally put food on their table. A lot of it is bravado and the ego and ignorance of youth. I'll hold my hand up for being part of that when I was ignorant and youthful. But part of it is this second and third generation of sort of gangsters and criminals that are well aware how to stay apart from this. They live in swanky houses. They've paid off their mortgage. They've got a couple of cars, and they just facilitate the middlemen that then facilitate the youngins. So the youngins are made into extremists, radicalized into this idea of the lifestyle of this gang mentality, and they can't see anything beyond it. They can't see prosperity or hope. They look around at the economics around them, and they're seeing life get worse. So to them, they've got to fight to get out of this. They're seeing that glorified criminal culture as familial. They're seeing it as family. They're seeing it as safety. They're seeing it as opportunity. So to them, they're doing the best thing for their future in their own minds. Obviously, yeah, from the outside looking in, you can see it's a fucked situation. But so what can people that were in the position that you were in, say, especially of PCCs who are elected to represent public interest, what can they do to help open this dialogue and actually see these connections rather than just going, let's go harder at them. We don't want to see metal detectors in schools. We don't want to see searches outside of school gates. We don't want to see this having to go down. There are ways we can de-escalate this.
Well, it's like the crime prevention triangle, isn't it? You've got location, you've got offender, and you've got victim. Yeah, you take one of them away and you solve the problem. Now, if you were to regulate, say, you regulated heroin as heroin-assisted treatment now. In Switzerland, there's a piece of academic work that's been done that shows that if you reduce the criminal market for heroin by you provide legal heroin to say 20% of your heaviest users, yeah, you could reduce the criminal markets by up to a half, by 50%. Now, if we could reduce the illegal heroin markets in the UK by half, yeah, imagine the impact that will have on crime and violence.
Yeah.
I know that heroin-assisted treatment costs a lot of money to do properly, but so does incarcerating people, so do the investigation of murders and homicide, not to mention the impact that it has on both the offender and the victim's families. The cost benefit of doing wide-scale heroin-assisted treatment, has got a massive implication, and we can do that legally. Yeah,
as you said.
Barry Coppinger up in Cleveland, he did the first heroin-assisted treatment. They've just done the evaluation, and it was good. Now we got Steve Turner, who's the new PCC. He says he's got to stop funding it. It is such a backward move when it comes to safeguarding society and vulnerable people. What you should be doing is enhancing it, and I hope you see the light before the end of the contract in September.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, there are some very committed activists and individuals in the region that I know are lobbying and working to try and get his ear to hopefully get him to see some sense within it, because his platform seems to be entirely ignorant. It's not about evidence-based. He's going, I want to look tough on drugs because of the drug scourge. And it's as you said, the cost analysis benefit on this is astronomical. Ron Hogg found this when they started to trial systems around SEAM, when they started to deprioritize, when they started to leave certain dealers alone and target, the dealers who were adulterating supply, the dealers who were ticking on people and then forcing them into criminality. Once they kind of were separating that, they were able to see a lot more clearly what was happening, and they were seeing exactly that. A handful of offenders were causing the majority of crimes to pay for what amounts to maybe a couple of grand a month habit. Whereas if you then go, all right, that's 15, 20 grand a year, we just buy the heroin for them, we give them a clean space to do it, we give them the clean needles, we give them the education, we then provide them with housing. as we found under the British way, which was what we had before the Misuse of Drugs Act came into effect, is the people that we prescribed to, they actually stabilized their lives. They didn't just lay about. They weren't just getting, as it were, I hate the term, but smacked up to the eyeballs, as it were. They were actually finding their therapeutic dose, and they were able to then find function. They were able to then face trauma. The vast majority of them were running from. They were using the substances and escapism, and they were able to then begin that process of healing and reintegration into society. And if we then remove the idea of saying that everyone has to get off the thing and just go, and actually, if this works for you in that therapeutic setting, then surely that's medicinal. We should then prescribe that or allow some form of access for that.
Yeah. So my answer is we can do that legally. We should be doing it, but to try and get practitioners to do it, I think that there's in Wales in particular, there is support from politicians for that. But you know, when it goes downstream to the civil servants, when it actually comes to delivering on it, there's resistance. Clinicians don't like it, and you just find you coming up against barriers. So you know, we need somebody within politics to sort of break down those barriers, and I'm not seeing those individuals at this moment in time. I must be honest with you.
No, me neither.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I did want to ask you is if you see anybody in the current sort of field that can be pushing this. Obviously, there is Crispin Blunt and Jeff Smith's thing that they've just pushed together, which is actually, by the time people are watching this, will have already been debated in Parliament. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen with it. It feels very last minute in terms of the announcement to the public. Do you know much about it?
No, all I know, there's a backbench debate on Thursday afternoon. I'm not sure what prompted it, because we got Tommy Shepherd's private members bill, the SNP from Edinburgh. I don't know where his private members bill is, but no, I'm not sure where this has come from. It'd be good to get a good turnout and get lots of people to speak. I think the leadership. I think the leadership is going to come from Scotland, because of the work that Peter Crichton has been doing with his overdose prevention site. There's a new public health minister there now, Angela Constance, and she tweets a lot of interesting stuff in the direction of travel and what they want to do. We got Ronnie Cowans, you got Tommy Shepherd, you got Alison Thewlis, to mention just 3 MPs who are desperately trying to change policy in Westminster. And obviously you've got a number of members of the Scottish Parliament as well. And with it being a policy of the Scottish Government to introduce progressive drugs policy in Scotland, I think that's where the leadership will come from.
Do you think that it would be...
Yeah, it's good.
Sorry, there's a delay, I think, when on my side of things, so I'm unintentionally interrupting you when I start to speak. What I was going to say is, do you think it would be strengthened by the independence side of things? And the reason I ask is, having spoken to quite a few Scots on this podcast, we've come up against what is the most useful weapon in preventing any sort of positive progression in drugs reform, which is, we want to do it, but that's the UK's decision. It's not the Scottish Parliament's decision. I mean, do we have this problem with Wales as well?
You got even more of a problem in Wales, because policing and criminal justice in Wales is not devolved, but health is. I appreciate where Scottish Government and the SNP are coming from. The Misuse of Drugs Act is not devolved, but there are such things as letters of comfort. So say now, one of the things I'm trying to do is to introduce crack pipes as harm reduction measures, especially with the COVID and the impact that it has on COPD and the risk to COVID. If a chief constable and a PCC in Wales were to sign a letter of comfort, we could do that. We had a chief constable in Wales before sign a letter of comfort to use foil back in the day, in 2007, before he became part of the Misuse of Drugs Act. Richard Brunston did it, so it can be done. So we should be using stuff like that. The Advocate General who is there's going to be a change, Advocate General in Scotland. If he or she was to sign a letter of comfort, I think the Westminster government would be hard pressed to fight against it. But saying that, and I've said this loads of times, what we really need is who has primacy over policy. Harm reduction measures like overdose prevention sites, are harm reduction measures. They are a health matter. Health is devolved in Scotland and in Wales. But Westminster are imposing the Misuse of Drugs Act to stop these innovative things from happening. Why don't we just have a big bun fight in the Supreme Court to find out who has primacy over health? Scotland, Wales, or Westminster? Once they decide, at least we got some clarity. But nobody seems to want to do that. But to me, that's the obvious way forward.
Yeah, it needs settling. The powers need devolving, because ultimately it's an impediment straight off the bat that if health can't then coordinate with policing to reduce the harm that the state is causing on some of the most vulnerable in our society, all they're doing is patching people up and sending them back into a war zone. They're setting them up to fail. And this causes burnout and fatigue within the healthcare sector. I've got quite a few friends that went into mental health and went into nursing and healthcare in general. And the way that the system has changed them, that they've come up against, because they came from raver communities, you know what I mean? They took pills on weekends and they went get sweaty with 20, 30 people at free parties. That's a very low number, you know what I mean? Larger numbers of people, and went to festivals and went to all kinds of events, and really it widened their cultural horizons, you know what I mean? And so they went after all of this hedonistic behavior. I will again hold my hand up and say much played a part in. They then decided, what can I do good for the world? And then to see them so burnt out and just so disillusioned by the system, they've gone, no, you're wrong. I'm being given this propaganda and told when somebody comes to me that I can't give them harm reduction advice. I can't give them actual techniques and tools that could save their life, that could prevent them getting illnesses that would not only destroy their lives, but potentially dozens, hundreds more. It's a ridiculous situation.
If you're a crack user in Ireland, the states will give you a glass pipe to take the crack safely. We can't do that legally in the UK without a change in the law or a letter of comfort from a chief constable and the PCC. It's a postcode lottery for crack users, really. If you want to go over to Dublin, that's fine. You got a far better chance of surviving taking crack cocaine than you do in the UK.
Absurd. It is absurd, really, because it's classist as well when you think of it. The molecule for crack and the molecule for coke and for powdered cocaine is exactly the same, yet the way in which it is dealt with within the legal system is ridiculous. I mean, this is something I just wanted to circle back to about Scotland and about obviously the great work of Peter Croycant. We had him on quite early on this podcast, and me and Maka were both blown away sort of by his passion, by his knowledge and his commitment to this. And again, the real lived experience, the power that brings, the knowledge that brings, I think is, I don't want to say superior to that of academia, but it has to be taken so much into consideration in conjunction with this to inform policy, and to see him actually now get sort of recognition and attention, to see conversations moving forward. As Mac has said before, the obfuscation by the Scottish government of going, oh, well, we don't have guidance on this, and looping it back to the UK, I think is just further going to fuel the fire for a potential Indie Ref 2 up in Scotland. From the people we've spoken to already, it seems Scotland would very much want to legalise cannabis as a means of economic stimulation, as well as creating their own sort of domestic hub. Do you think this is potentially something that Wales would consider doing? Because if Scotland kicked that door open, England are not going to get it shut again.
Well, no, and I don't think you need Scotland and Wales to do it. I think it's going to get introduced slowly across Europe. We've got 15 states in America. We are looking for a federal law to regulate recreational cannabis. And when you got when you got Jeff Bezos and Amazon, supporting it, seeing the opportunity, then it's on the cards, isn't it?
This is true.
Yeah, I think where America goes, the rest follows.
Yeah, everything's just going to come in an Amazon bar. So. Yeah, you can see it happening.
Yeah. But that isn't good either, because we should be allowed. Smaller social enterprises should be allowed into the business. Very often, as what's the names used to be the Massachusetts control. I can't remember her name now, but she argues very, very strongly for the sort of communitarian social enterprise organisations to get involved in the manufacture of cannabis, rather than it just being what I call big weed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the monocropping and the industrial scale that it is cultivated in means that it loses a lot of the. I literally went to go the French of je ne sais quoi, the unknown thing of weed that people will tell you that I would rather smoke somebody's cupboard grown cannabis because it's grown with love. There's something more to it. I mean, again, same. I've traveled into various places around the world. I mean, lucky enough to try a lot of legal weed, and ultimately, it's Starbucks, it's McDonald's, it's filling, it'll do its job, but it doesn't have the story, it doesn't have the narrative. Whereas the mum and pops that I found and the stories that would tell, oh well, me and our husband, we grew it illegally for 30 years and sold it around here, and then when it went legal, everyone said you should start a business. So we started. They're the people that I want to support. They're the stories, the ones who actually push this narrative. It's not a case of when the government signs on the dotted line and it's legal, that all the vulture capitalists that come in and get to write the narrative. It only got there because of the dealers, because of the illegal enterprise. And a lot of them are not bad people. The people that we see at club events that we travel around, when I travel around the UK and that I've met over the past several years, they're just ingenuitive entrepreneurs that are criminalized. They have brilliant branding ideas, amazing marketing ideas. They have wonderful gimmicks. They have great personalities. They have a great sort of honor and respect about the way that they operate. You know what I mean? They check IDs at events. They ensure that their products are grown to the highest standard. They're all organic, etc. And I think that they, as you said, deserve that opportunity, because otherwise, if we build a wall around them, they're going to spend the next 10 years kicking it down.
Yeah. You see, if you got companies like Amazon and them, and they sort of price it too high, then people will still go into buy from the illegal markets. You look at what's happening in Uruguay, and I like the Uruguayan system. They got a pharmaceutical system. You've got to be licensed. You've got to be an Uruguayan citizen. You can't have any sort of cannabis tourism. You can buy your own. You can grow your own, and you can have small cannabis clubs of up to 30. Ideal. The thing is, the big weed has started taking over the actual supply. The result is that in Uruguay, only 25% of the cannabis market is provided by the legal market. The rest is provided by the illegal criminal market. And that is because availability and pricing, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the same is true of the US states. As you said before, I think we were up to 17 legal so-called recreational states in America, and 33 states have medical plus 2 jurisdictions. So it's basically there. If you really look at the math of it, it is nearly there. Yet in the majority of those states, the vast majority of people are still buying from a legal supply. I actually, when I traveled to Massachusetts just after they'd legalized, we drove to Maine to go get weed, because there was no dispensaries open at that time. They'd legalized cannabis, but they'd created no infrastructure for it because they were still bickering over tax. And this was the problem they had in California. So when I visited California, I did a 3-hour round trip to go to Oregon to buy weed. So I didn't have to go through their draconian measures of getting my passport taken off me and get made to feel like a criminal as I'm funneled through the system and hurried out of the shop for weed that costs 4 times the price that it did back home. Whereas I went over the border to Oregon and it was about five times cheaper. I get to just flash my passport, spend all day chatting shit with them. They've got couches and stuff inside, and they're quite happy for me to ask all the questions I want, do a bit of filming with them. So there's the systems that they've created and the piloting. Yeah. They serve some markets, but most of them are predominantly the capitalists that have put their money in, and they want to get their money back out. Whereas the people that voted to legalize it, it isn't often reflective of their intention, their wants.
It's very similar to what happened when the Volstead Act got repealed back in 1929. You know, it was big booze then. That got involved, and you know, criminal activity remained. They moved from alcohol to drugs, and they're still there today. So you know what created criminal activity in the States was the passage of the Volstead Act in 1919. You know, it just created a criminal underworld, and we're doing exactly the same. We're not learning any lessons at all from history.
If you look at it, actually, yeah, toward the end of alcohol prohibition and the repeal of the 18th Amendment, 19th Amendment, whatever it was, it was companies and individuals like Bacardi that were lobbying the government at the time. They were the ones in conversation. Bear in mind, a lot of these people rose up through criminality that were then forming policy that then became brands that became heritage to that market. The same damn thing is happening now. So in some of the markets in the regions, the people with some of the worst morals and intentions have risen to the top. So while they allowed everything to remain illegal, they just let it sort of rise. That whoever had the money at the top to buy in, bought in. They never did sort of background checks on them. Nobody's then gone, where have you got your money? Who are you? And what are your intentions with this? It's just pay to play. Whereas the people who are then, well, actually, I've spent 30 years with this plant and I've been arrested 25 times and I've served 4 years in prison here and 6 here and this there. They're the ones who should be given first access because they know the plant, they know the culture, and they know the people in terms of the community. And I think they should be given that first opportunity to rebuild their lives and to be given some form of recompense, because it's the same as the when we repealed the criminalization of homosexuality in this country. We still have not yet dealt with that, really. We've kind of got to look at Alan Turing, a war hero who was then chemically castrated after basically winning the Second World War. If you look at the Enigma story, it was only 3 years ago that the government issued an apology to him. So I think that if we allow this big weed to take off, it's going to be 50 years before anybody goes, whoa, 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 and looks around and sees what the hell's going on. And then Starbucks have moved in, Shell's moved in, whoever else. Because again, cannabis isn't just a drug. It's a multifaceted resource. It's energy production. It's batteries. It's clothing and textiles. It's a lot when you really look at it. So it's not just a few players. It's the entire world has kind of gone, oh, this resource could be the next big thing. And so they're all vying to take over it. And they're all stepping on, like I say, the millions of people around the world who discovered its medicinal benefits, who fought for their right to grow it, who protected the genetics and hid those seeds, kept mother plants alive for 10, 20 years.
It's almost as if it's designed that way.
It's absolutely massive. Yeah.
Sorry, got that delay again off Macca there. What did you say, Arfon?
No, I'm fine. Mac, you carry on.
All right, Jude. No, I was just going to say, it's almost as if, there's a system in place to maximize profits by dragging your heels and only, allowing a certain amount of policies to actually change. So it looks like you're fucking doing something so that you can hold your ground and be re-elected. It's just like, it's almost designed that way on purpose.
Yeah. They're not, though, is it? Most politicians are populists. Yeah, they're not interested in doing what is right. They're only looking for the next 4 or 5 years. Yeah, exactly. And they don't want to cause any controversy in that time. They think their support for regulating drugs or decriminalisation or whatever you want to call it, is a vote loser. Personally, I don't think it is. I think the public in this country have moved on a lot more than what politicians have. Whenever my local paper did a poll on my views, it was always 70-30. In fact, one of my favourite cities is Leicester, because the Leicester Mercury did a poll on my views on cannabis, and I got 93% support. So I'm a big fan of the readers of the Leicester Mercury.
Nice. Yeah, but again, it shows the disconnection between the sphere and the power of media and the sphere of politics and of influence, and the sheer lack of reciprocation of information. They're just not communicating. Politicians are then looking at what the mainstream press is still doing. So the Reach PLC and their thousands of online publications will keep dropping in these what to do if your neighbor is smoking cannabis. These demonization and propaganda sort of stories. So that the majority of people can see sort of through this, but then it almost feels as if the politicians are looking at the public through the media's lens and going, well, if it's important to the media, it must be important to the public. And they're taking what has now become quite a corrupted institution because they represent far more corporation than they do citizen.
Yeah. Oh, I know that, the media are not representative of anybody, politicians or the public. They make it up as they go along, particularly some of them. Some are better than others. But, another example is I'm sure that many of your listeners, and I'd like to know really, I'd like to do a piece of work on this. How many adults who have been either cautioned or arrested for cannabis, who have had their children referred to social services because they're not deemed to be caring for them. I know there was one force, and I won't mention them. I saw an article about this, but I suspect it's probably more widespread than what we think. But what an absolute nonsense! You know, parents who take cannabis, can most certainly care for their children. If parents could take alcohol and care for their children, they can most certainly take cannabis and care for their children. But it'd be good to know if any of your listeners have any experience or how come across this, because I'm particularly interested in whether this has happened, because I suspect it has.
Well, I'll reach out to sort of my wider network as well and see if anybody sort of is interested in talking. Because I think that is really good data to sort of correlate. I mean, it's a question that I did want to ask you is, have you noticed sort of a correlation? Because obviously you were quite a champion as a PCC for the survivors and victims of domestic abuse, and also during sort of your policing career. Did you notice a correlation between sort of excessive alcohol consumption and domestic abuse?
Oh, most certainly. Like sort of domestic violence goes up on the days of rugby, football internationals, big football matches. The most violent individuals I've seen are ones that have been under the influence of alcohol. To be honest, I've never come across anybody who was other than sort of chilled out, who'd been using cannabis. I've never seen any violence. Obviously, there are people now who are under the influence of spice and other drugs, but that is as a consequence of the war on drugs. So there are people that take drugs now that can be violent. But in my time as a police officer, the vast majority of violence was most certainly linked to alcohol and to nothing else.
I mean, this is a common refrain. It's something that, again, Neil Woods spoke with us about. That's something that I've found time and time again in research for comparative pieces that I've written for various websites and blogs. And it's difficult because then when Parliament debate this, they immediately bias the argument by saying drugs and alcohol. So they immediately remove it from the harms of drugs conversation. The same with tobacco. It's because they're not scheduled under MODA. So they sit in their own little sort of twilight zone so that they're bad. But then as soon as someone goes, let's legislate them, everyone goes, oh, no, but this is our freedom and our right to do it. And the logical fallacy of that argument, when it's not applied to MODA, and I think it's the hypocrisy as much as anything that more people are starting to tune into, and they're going, hey, I don't do heroin, or I don't smoke crack, or I don't even sniff coke, or say even, but I don't consume any drug. And I still see and recognize that hypocrisy. So whereas the politician stood at the pulpit previously, knowing that he had the attention of the press and being able to stand there and go, we got this and we found this and this, used to play really well and resonate of going, they're cleaning up the streets. People are now then going, well, what are you doing about the pub on the corner that's Lowry as hell? That's insane. It's the juxtaposition of it. I mean, we had Danny Kushlik on from Transform last week, and he pointed out the wonderful absurdity of the sign that's behind the bar in every pub, which says, we will not tolerate drug dealing of any kind on these premises.
Yeah, I know.
It's just...
Yeah. It is a nonsense, isn't it? Well, the other piece of work that hasn't been done, I think that should be done, is, whenever you sadly have homicides, obviously you carry out a blood test on both the offender and the victim, whether it's violence or whatever. And it'd be interesting to know, how many offenders, how many victims have actually, consumed alcohol to excess or consumed other substances to excess or polydrug use or whatever. That is a type of figures that are never ever published, and very often that is the reason why the violence has happened.
I think it's ultimately the idea that, I suppose, if they have to be open about one, they have to be open about all, and so this would be quite crazy, because then the evidence has been mounting slowly for the past 20, 30 years around tobacco and psychosis. There is at least a casual relationship, if not a causal one. So this is where the argument of cannabis psychosis in Europe comes from, that somewhere in the region of 75% of cannabis use is mixed with tobacco. So it'd be interesting to then find out tobacco, caffeine as well. Not in that I'm suggesting that these substances play a role within murder or with a crime, but just to be able to provide that wider spectrum to then be able to extrapolate how subtle and nuanced changes within our physiology and within our mental states occurs under the effects of these substances. Because if we're all of a sudden packaging cigarette boxes with cancerous tumors and horrible imagery and very definitive and very quite aggressive often language, we then need to apply that to the rest of the board. We have to, we can't just pick and choose at this. And I think that this is why there is this resistance. It's partly, as I think Maka alluded to before, of not wanting to be the first through the door and risk your opportunity for re-election. But I also think that part of it is the fear that once you pull that first card, it all falls. And it's far more than just people's rights to consume drugs. It's homelessness. It's as you were speaking of before, inquisitive crime. It's health. It's so many other things. Sorry, go on, Maka.
It's just like, in conjunction with the careerist point of view, you know, the short-term 4 to 5 years thing, in terms of maintenance of status quo, right? As we sort of alluded to with Danny Kushlik, it's all about intent. You pull that card, it's not fear, I don't think. It's, if I pull this card, there's less opportunity for me to be on the positive side of things in terms of a capitalist gain or something like this, or pure and utter laziness. This will cause so much effort, and you know what I mean, it could be a potential vote loser or whatever, but it's going to open all of this fucking door. I'll just fucking leave it there. Actually, I'll just make it look like I'm doing something by raising the age of cigarettes to 21, because that's going to fucking do anything. It's not going to do anything. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. I have a very cynical view of step by step processes that aren't sort of a radical change, you know?
Yeah. I'm of the view that psychosis links to cannabis use is because young people and children used it as to a younger age. You know, has that ever been explored?
It hasn't been studied. It's quite interesting because I mean, I started smoking tobacco when I was about 9.5, 10. Made a deal with my mother when I was 10. I'd stopped stealing money off her. She bought me 10 Lambert Butler every day. Saved me the embarrassment to stand outside the co-op with a handful of change going, "Could I have 10 Lambert? Someone 10 Lambert, please." You know, and I was then introduced into to hash and soap bar and floral. That's, I like that, floral cannabis at about 14, 15, and then continued to be a regular consumer. A lot of the people that I know that consumed it early, they had quite positive relationships with it. But then I have met people that had negative reactions of youth that then didn't consume for a long time and then consumed again and then still had problems with it. Right. So I think that there is an argument to be made, the same with anything, that not everything is for everyone. You know, so some people drink alcohol and they have really serious personality breaks. They have, I mean, blackout drunk is effectively just a form of temporary psychosis. People are removed from their morals. They're removed from their normal restraints of personality, and they become far more flamboyant, sometimes aggressive, sometimes violent, sometimes sexually offensive. And in that, then culturally, we almost justify as going, they had one too many, without kind of going, well, no, that's a thing. Whereas again, I've met a lot of people, and I myself have even had one time with a serious dose of edibles, sort of neurological difficulties, I'll call them, an experience that I did not want and could not reduce. But because of my knowledge and experience of it, I was able to handle it sort of quite well. So I think there is sort of the naivety of the experience, and I think that there's going to be other precipitous factors. If we then looked at the environments that they came from, the home life, for example. But yeah, I think that, again, these are the things that need studying. The issue that they have is ethics. Because if we're then going to study drug use in children, that means we have to know the kid is taking drugs and then still let them take drugs.
Yeah, it won't happen, will it?
It's not. So then we could go with self-reporting, but then what 15-year-old isn't going to be like, "Oh yeah, mate, I did a quarter of coke at the weekend, you know, I'd given it big legs in front of his mates." You know, it's a really hard place to gain that data from. And even retrospectively, from someone like myself giving that anecdote, that's coming from a place of nostalgia. You know what I mean? I had a hell of a lot of trauma in my life. I was removed from mainstream education, suffered a lot of abuse. And so my experience with drugs was incredibly positive because they were a form of escapism, and the community around them at that time wasn't this gangland mentality. It was Dave the dealer. You know what I mean? You went around Dave's house and he let you roll a joint, you make a cup of tea, and he'd introduce you to new movies and shit. A few people would come around and you'd meet new friends. It was a whole social experience. It wasn't some kid on a bike that's carrying a fucking machete down his back if you ain't going to give him a tenner quick enough.
Well, the thing is, I think if you were going through that now, Simba, that you would probably be been drawn into the county line drug dealing if you were that age again now.
Yeah, because they would have recognized my vulnerability. They'd have recognized my desire to want to get access to more and more drugs and different types of drugs, and to want to fit in and to want to fill in the absence of a father and all of those other things. You can see it when you can really look at it and see the suffering of these vulnerable kids that are then turned into temporarily vicious thugs. This isn't a write-off for life, but they can end up in some very destructive situations where they have to make a life or death decision that can write them off for the entirety of their life. They stab somebody, they attack somebody, they rob somebody. The horror stories, man. I had dealer mates that were chopped with machetes, that like machetes chopped into their hands when their crops were robbed. And this has just escalated over the years. The stories you hear and the level of sophistication and organization within the higher ups that then control these youths within county lines operations is quite terrifying. And I feel that aggressive policing and over prohibiting isn't really going to help. But then on the other side, going, oh, let's just let the kids smoke weed, isn't an answer either. How do we address the socioeconomic and the individual issues that are making that lifestyle desirable to vulnerable people?
There's a bit of mix and match, isn't it? You've got to reduce the demand, and you've got to regulate the supply, because you're not gonna stop people taking drugs. It's bad enough trying to reduce children from taking drugs. It's impossible to address adult behaviour. And why would you want to if they're not causing anybody any harm? What we should be doing is regulating the supply.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. If all of this.
Go ahead.
If all of the substances that are out there are pharmaceutical grade, the cleanest, there are zero adulterants, you then know exactly if a child has an overdose on a drug, they can be dealt with almost immediately. The pharmaceutical companies are now coming up with antagonists for so many different drugs. If they have an interaction with an opioid, you can give them naloxone and you can reverse that overdose. Obviously, there's going to be trauma from the experience, etc. But if then dealt with in the right environment, that's sort of fine. You know what I mean? We need to look at almost the mentality of it. Obviously, it's a horror image if then a child gets pricked by a heroin needle that's been left out and they've then been injected with it. But it's the same. Then look on the other side of the spectrum of access. Somebody then opened Mammy's opioid bottles was open, and they ate a couple of Smarties. They're having the same effect, but the cultural view of it is so different. The junkie mom is going to be their life is destroyed, going to prison, the kid's gone. The other one is going to go, this is not against your prescription guidelines. You've had a lucky escape here and things will be fine. In future, please keep it out of child reach. The difference in it. And I think that's what we need to remove the stigma from it, so that we can actually have rational conversations about what is happening. What's more harmful? A parent who's got a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old, and they smoke a bit of weed on an evening to help them get to sleep, but they keep their access in a locked box hidden under their bed, and their kids don't actually smoke weed because their mum's been open with them since they were kids. So they don't have this idolization of taboo. They don't have this, I'm going to be cool, because they just go, that's mummy's medicine. How are they more dangerous than a parent that goes and drinks 6 or 7 pints every night after work, comes home, beats the missus and terrifies the kids?
Quite.
It's absurd.
An awful lot of what you just said is rhetorical, hence the sort of silence. You know,
I know. I realized that towards the end of it. I was like, I'm trying to make this into a question.
Yeah, but you were just answering your own question the whole way through. But it just boils down for me. It boils down to a level of opportunism, as we've already discussed, but a lack of proper non-classist but contextual application, and that comes across. That applies to policing. It would apply to education as well. Do you know, that kind of way? It's like, I don't know. It's as you've alluded to, Simpa. It's one rule for one if you can pay for it, and another rule for everybody else. And then very much a when somebody comes up against that, it's the letter of the law must be satisfied, or the letter of this process must be satisfied, and we're not thinking outside of this box because it's hassle or a vote loser, or we don't want too much to fucking change. Do you know what I mean? So a question I'd have to you, Arfon, would be, when you started in the police, was there much more of a contextual application, like in terms of sort of, you know, the police officer knowing the community, knowing every person by name, you know, that old school level of policing?
Sorry, what was the, you know, yeah, we knew, you know, always suspected who was, you know, using drugs, or, and yeah, we used to do something about it. And a lot of the time they were not cautioned, they were charged, taken to court. There again, it was counterproductive. I don't see anything that was gained from it. But no, I don't think the fact that we knew people had much impact on it. You know, it was expected that if we knew somebody was breaking the law, that we would do something about it. I think officers today have got a lot more discretion in how they enforce the law, but they still need the tools. You know, you can't take a lump of cannabis off somebody and throw it down the drain, can you? You still need to have a process whereby you can deal with that, and that's why we got checkpoints. We got checkpoint Cymru in North Wales. We got checkpoint in Durham, so that we can deal with people who have small amounts of possession. And what we do, they go through an education program about 3 hours long, and that's the end of the story. It's recorded as a community resolution. It's not a caution. No fingerprints, no DNA, no. It will appear on an enhanced DBA, I think, disclosure check, but not on a standard one, which I still think is wrong, because what relevance has a possession of drugs got towards an enhanced disclosure check?
Yeah, exactly. I think it comes off after so many years, or it becomes non-viewable after so long. But yeah, exactly that. It's still some form of a stigma. It's some form of a mark of identification of going that this is wrong, and actually it's only wrong because of the letter of the law. Which actually brings me on to a question I wanted to ask you. Have you heard of Outlaw by any chance? The balaclavaed man from Manchester?
No.
He's got a very big presence on social media, music producer, self-financed, an activist. He's been around for a few years. He did quite a few sort of high media attention stunts where he dressed up as Santa and he gave out cannabis and £10 notes and Christmas cards. He then basically, he's been using the letter of the law to get people compensation claims for false detainment for cannabis arrests. He's become so successful with it that they've launched a Medican card, which is similar to Can card. And they're having great success, and they're signing on a lot of lawyers at the minute. I believe that they're up to sort of a dozen at the minute, but the legal network that they're reaching in could be potentially hundreds, if not 1,000 plus. And what they've done is they've found an exploit within the law of basically using freedom of information requests to get the definitions of everything within the legislation. And they're just showing an open sort of hypocrisy to this. There's another sort of campaign of Seed Our Future, who have done some meticulous, unbelievable work into the history of the international conventions that led to the Misuse of Drugs Act in all of the various countries around the world. And there is sort of a suspicion between some people within the community that potentially the immediacy with which this bill has been called, this backbench conversation in a few days has been called, is to try to get ahead of their judicial review, because they've had it accepted now, they've self-funded it. And so they're basically looking to take the government to task to do a review into the Misuse of Drugs Act. So I just wanted to get sort of your thoughts on.
I must be honest, it's all news to me. All I know, the legislation. There's a debate on Thursday. I really don't know what is in it. I haven't been privy to what Jeff or Crispin is going to say, although I know them both. As far as the Can card, yeah, I am aware of that. I'm not aware of the ins and outs of how it came about, but I support it in principle. You know, I think it's a good thing. I hope that people are successful in avoiding prosecution for, for cannabis possession as a consequence, because I don't think anybody should be taken to court for cannabis possession.
Yeah, so the card systems, so obviously, yeah, they are quite interesting in terms of the way that they're presenting. So CanCard are doing education around with police, with the police federation, and trying to obviously get them to acknowledge this. It would seem that the cards are having some effect in various regions, but as usual, it is a postcode lottery. I just want to get your thoughts on home growing, on individuals sort of growing their own, because the ultimate argument is they're removing themselves from an illicit marketplace. They're not having to then ring up and wait for these kids on the bikes to come and drop off their 10 of it, 20 bit every few days.
Well, yeah, the argument for allowing for homegrown or small scale cannabis clubs is overwhelming. That people can grow their own, and that they can withdraw from the criminal market, which will obviously reduce. And as a consequence, if you reduce the drug market, you reduce the violence and criminality associated with it. So grow your own, and cannabis clubs is a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned.
Interesting. Yeah, I obviously totally agree. When Durham City Cannabis Club, and that is our long-term sort of ambition, is to be able to facilitate opening a bricks and mortar club and have our own full regulated supply. It's an interesting sort of idea that to look at, say, decriminalizing or allowing some sort of discretion, some sort of de facto decriminalization in law, so that it's less policy driven. It's more the police authorities themselves just kind of going, well, this exists, and we're just not going to deal with it. More the Dutch approach than anything else. They're not going to actually push the legislation. They just kind of go, well, this exists. We have the discretion of going, if you stay under 500 grams on site, we'll not raid you. As long as you kind of follow these basic rules, you'll be left alone. There are obviously means to exploit that market and the rough licensing that does exist within it, but they have pretty much smoothed a lot of it out. They are trying to figure out what the Dutch call the backdoor problem of supply, which is that the cannabis is technically legal on site, but it's illegal to grow it, and it's illegal to import it, and it's illegal to get it to the building. So they're now trialing grow your owns, where various coffee shops have been given discretion to sort of grow and then sell. So one of the things I wanted to ask you is, do you think there's this potential for a conglomeratization of information between police, universities, and, say, cannabis clubs or institutions? Because if the clubs grew the weed, the universities tested the weed, the police, wherever they found weed on the outside, tested that, and we compared them, we could find these adulterants, we could find these weak points within the market, and we could reduce the potential negative consequences of, say, moldy weed or spice sprayed weed, which is becoming more of a thing. I mean, I remember we had sand sprayed weed for a while, glass sprayed weed, because it bumped the weight up. Yeah, there was all sorts of crap that gangs were using to just make that extra buck.
We've had, in policing, we've had lots of debates over the years. The fundamental problem you have is that if the Chief Constable in North Wales tomorrow said, listen, I'm not bothered about people using cannabis, people think, yeah, that's great, we can go out, we can do it, yeah. But that doesn't stop the individual officers, if that individual officer doesn't agree with the Chief Constable's view, that individual officers can still use their discretion to arrest. So therefore, you cannot have carte blanche. You can individual officers can ignore what is going on. We can divert them. That is what de facto decriminalisation is, really. It's a different way of dealing with something. You can either ignore it not happening or deal with it in a different way without criminalisation. And that is all, in Portugal, it's got a de jure legal basis, whereby in this country it hasn't. But what we're doing in Durham, and Thames Valley and North Wales and West Midlands is very, very much de facto decriminalisation. But I just cannot see any Chief Constable or any PCC. Well, a PCC couldn't anyway, because they can't interfere in the operational running of the force. But I can't see a Chief Constable actually giving anybody carte blanche. I can't see the Chief Constable of Durham giving you carte blanche to run Durham cannabis club. Yeah.
Mm. No, yeah.
I can't see it happening, to be honest with you. Not in this current environment we're in, and even more so now with a sort of a home secretary who is pretty sort of inflexible around these things.
That's very polite of you.
You know, which is possibly the nicest thing they could say, really.
Yeah, indeed, we live in a very weird time. I mean, bless his soul. Obviously, when we had sort of Ron Hogg and Mike Barton, I mean, Mike Barton kind of really pushed the boat out. He was Durham's obviously former chief constable, and he kind of made it very much known to his officers that if they brought petty possession in front of him, the officer could face a slap on the wrist as much as anything. So he, in conjunction with sort of Ron kind of basically being the flak shield, as it were, he took the media flak and he went, you know what, fuck this. This is the right thing to do. Give us time. We'll show the evidence. He showed the evidence, and the media tried to crucify him time and time again. Yet the same thing happened that you discussed before. Polls backed him. His second re-election, his numbers went up astronomically because of people lobbying within the community to go look at the benefits, look at what's actually happened. Yeah. And kind of since then, there's not necessarily been a regression, but there has been an increase in raids because a lot of the small hobbyist growers have gone under, because of the mechanism I was discussing before of these larger enterprises turning up with blacked out vans into hydro shops, spending a few grand, gutting up a couple of houses, getting a few crops down with people trafficked here illegally. You know, they're getting exploited and abused in order to produce these plants. They're then getting put onto the market, and they're the criminality that need disrupting. And I think that's what I hope will in future be recognized in policing, is that yes, under the letter of the law, they're all illegal, but let's put them on a spectrum and actually go, who are the enterprise that are seriously organized crime that are then preying on the vulnerable, actively targeting weak points in communities? And who are the people who are just surviving and getting on?
Yeah. Well, you see, I think you've got to take into account as well the political pressures on chief constables, yeah? Mm. You know, the Home Secretary and the policing minister, to give you two examples, the Coulson statue in Bristol, where both the Chief Constable and the PCC got quite a bit of earache, I understand, from the Home Secretary. And also, there was a Chief Constable who didn't deal with an Extinction Rebellion protest somewhere involving some trains that met with the Home Secretary's approval, and he or she also got to, you know, got a bit of a earwigging for it. So, you know, I although chief constables are independent in their force areas, yeah, they're not without external influence.
Yeah, nothing exists within a vacuum in power, it would seem. No. So what are your thoughts then on, this is a bit more future-y, on all drugs being legalized, on the idea that's being explored, say, in places like Colombia and Bolivia, where they allow discretionarily not just cannabis clubs, but coca clubs? See, yes, you can be served cocaine, but typically everything is coca leaf. So it's from a low grade extract. It's not a high concentrated extract.
Well, you know, it's culturally, it's part of Bolivia's culture and Peru's culture to consume cocoa tea. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they've done it for generations without any massive harm, from what I can see. Obviously, more harm has befallen them as a result of interference by the DEA and other organisations than has from consuming cocoa tea. As I say, I fully support heroin-assisted treatment, which is regulation of heroin. Because you look at Scotland at the moment, they've got a massive problem with illegal benzos. On the streets. Yeah, part of that problem
fake blues.
Yeah, is because doctors will not prescribe Valium. So people go the underground. They get them on the internet. They're dying in massive numbers in Scotland, and it's exactly the same problem. If GPs and other clinicians actually prescribe people who need benzos or Valium or whatever, they wouldn't need to go underground to get them and harm themselves in the process.
Well, one other thing that is quite important is the actual public verbalization of I'm not sure what the correct term is, de facto decriminalization or something like that. So, and saying in cannabis, say like moving the onus onto home growing in that regard would be it would be very much a positive to local communities, and it would damage the pockets of the illicit market and those controlling it. I think I don't think that that's the only solution. I think that that's a pretty fucking good one, or sorry, step to take, should I say.
Yeah, I agree. We should have a, like you do in Uruguay, because you can't just go your own without a license. I think you've got a maximum of 7 plants that you can grow in your own premises, which I think would might not suit everybody, but it would suit a lot.
Yeah, I think as an entry point, because again, it's something I've come around to recently, and I'll admit my fault here. I'm an extremist. A lot of people will call me. I try to believe myself to be a rationalist, but I come across quite extreme in terms of I know what I'm fighting for, so that when I'm your age, I hope the world I hope to live in. But I've recognized the need for limitations while there is the mass of the criminal market. Until we quash this, then we can deregulate. So like alcohol production, I could ferment and fill this house, every square inch of it. I could be sat on a throne of crates of beer right now, and there's no regulation to it. I could sit here and drink myself to death, and it'd be, oh, it's a tragedy, isn't it? But there's no reason for intervention. There's no reason for licensing. And I think obviously, yeah, the culture needs to change, and we need to eradicate the criminal market. So I do now kind of see the need to flow through that to something sort of more progressive. But then how do we look at things like entheogenic substances, like psychedelics? Because at the minute, what we're seeing is the same in people in, I call them vulture investors, that circled around cannabis are now putting billions, and I mean billions, into psilocybin derived from magic mushrooms, LSD, DMT, MDMA, ketamine. And so you've got clinics popping up in places like Bristol that have, again, because the government have allowed these licenses for them to hold these controlled substances and use them in applied therapies for medical and scientific purposes, they're now starting to patent stuff. So Danny brought up on the podcast previous, something that I checked out that is real, is a patented pillow. So this company has patented the pillow that you lay your head on when you take these drugs. And it's so removed from the ceremonies, the cultural ceremonies that have existed in traditional cultures around the world, or even that I kind of grew up in. It was a rite of passage to kind of take your first ecstasy pill at an illegal party. You know, it was your rite of passage to have your first sort of LSD experience in nature, you know what I mean? Or to take mushrooms and go picking mushrooms for the first time. And these were things that really inform your life, and the experiences are so profound that some of the most recognized and intellectual and glorified individuals of our history have stated that these experiences were some of the most profound of their life. So what can happen, what can occur in the culture, in policing, in politics, to stop this corporate machine just coming in and going, all right, we can cure everything now with mushrooms, and mushrooms will become the next, I'm trying to think of the last snake oil we had. But you know what I mean, like berry scam or whatever.
Yeah. Crispin Blunt with the Conservative group for drug reform has already done a fair bit of work on psilocybin and its impact on mental health. I don't think the government have looked upon it too favourably. I'm not exactly sure where we are. Obviously, there's loads of controlled drugs that get used for all sorts of things, not just mental health. We got amphetamines, we got cocaine, we got heroin. You know, that the fact that they're manufactured and tried and tested for different things, I don't think is anything new, and I don't think it's it's a bad thing. Mm-hmm. If psilocybin helps people mental health issues, then go for it. You know, produce a substance out of it that can be prescribed. Because at the end of the day, we're here to safeguard people and ensure the best quality of life for all, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's interesting. There was a study that came out this year that showed that the efficacy of psilocybin in a placebo-controlled trial and then against traditional SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor drugs, was shown to be far, far superior. There have been several other trials over the past, several decades. There have been people like Bill Wilson who've been quietly doing this research for about 50 years, probably coming on 60 years now at places like Johns Hopkins University. If that was then to be the state that was created, how would the system then deal with the fact that wherever there is animal shit, especially cow shit, you will have liberty cap mushrooms growing wild here that are powerfully potent, quite a wonderful but very emotional experience for most people. At the minute, they were criminalized in 2005. Up to that point, it was only illegal if you dried them. You could go and pick them and have a carrier bag full of a kilo, and the police would stop you and go, "What's that?" "Wet mushrooms." They go, "They're wet as long as you don't dry them." 2005, they went with the change of the law. They were then challenged on why have you put them as a Schedule 1 Class A, and they went because of the harms perceived to society. There was no evidence base to it. No. And so since then, they've been classified the same as heroin, as cocaine, as LSD, and yet they are indigenous to this country. How do we then reconcile those two truths?
Well, we haven't been able to since 1971. You know, the perceived harm and the evidence base bear no resemblance. You know, the governments have legislated, not just Misuse of Drugs Act, you've got the Psychoactive Substances Act, which was, you know, prohibited psychoactive substances, except tobacco and alcohol, I hasten to add, and a few others.
I can't remember the drink chocolate.
It has, before the Psychoactive Substances Act, the vast majority of people, head shops, wouldn't have registered on their agenda. All of a sudden, we prohibit psychoactive substances, and we have reports from all over the country, including Wrexham, of people. Well, you know, I think zombie-like is the description that the Mail and the Express would use. I'm not one for using these type of descriptors of people who are unfortunately under the influence of drugs. So, no, you can't reconcile, you know, perceived wisdoms and evidence base, because the evidence base doesn't reflect perceived wisdom. Simple as that.
So, is there a way to decouple this very toxic relationship between fact and reality and perception? Because it was something that actually, in a conversation I had with Mike Barton, he talked about that one of the most important aspects of policing is the public's perception of the job the police do. Doesn't matter where they put the numbers, what they do at the end of the day. The thing they have to work to is how the public view what they're doing. If they think they're successful, they're successful. If they're not successful, it doesn't matter what the numbers amount to. So what can be done to re-enfranchise policing communities? Because especially, I mean, I live in Durham, and we're in the worst end of Durham, you know, the Sherburn Road area, and that over this sort of way of people. They are considered the worst of the worst. They're housed there because of their previous crimes or whatever. The perception of criminality and of the demonization of this population. I've lived there for nearly 15 years. Other than the odd, some serious shit by the odd individual, the vast majority of them are just victims of the system. They're victims of their own happenstance and their own upbringing.
You're not, the only way to change this has got to be change culture amongst politicians, yeah? And this is equally, doesn't matter which one of the two big parties. You know, Keir Starmer has said some rather negative things around progressive drugs policy, so it's not all the fault of the government. You've got to decouple the evidence base from ideology, basically. What drives government and opposition politics is ideology. How do they see, things? And I thought we were getting quite good at educating them. You know, there's an awful lot of MPs in the Commons of all parties that actually get this. But when they get into power, they decide, we don't want to. We understand what the problem is, but we don't want to do anything about it because we might not win the next election in 5 years' time because we've done this.
Yeah, I think there's also, probably without getting too conspiratorial, unfortunately, quite a lot of money swashing around chambers. So it's interesting of an anecdote that was told to me by a former executive of a massive international conglomerate of Tilray's presence in Portugal. Obviously, Portugal decriminalized by de jure, by legislation, all substances with a 10-day supply back in 2001. they had this on the table. I think 2017. They were looking at not 2018. I think 2018. They were looking at legalizing cannabis, creating a system similar to some American states. Tilray had got into government chambers, and all of a sudden this was then voted down. They decided to back the idea of then medical cannabis without domestic cultivation. Within, I think, 6 months, Tilray opened a 24 million euro grow facility to serve the needs of Europe in the region. Those same executives and individuals are known to be lobbying various pockets of not just government, but various political parties, various organizations, and sort of governing bodies within the industry as well. So there is a lot of creeping interest from very, very big weed.
Oh, yeah. The same as big oil, big pharmacy, big farm.
So is there any sort of hope for the individual? Because I want to live in a world where...
No.
I mean, I've sat and smoked a joint the whole time we've had this... Whoa. No what?
There is no hope for the individual. There's the
is there any hope? You've just said no. Sorry. No, shut up. There is. People listening to this don't want to hear your crap. They want to hear hope, right? So how can we reignite the idea? I have it in my head because I was actually paid to go on a community coaching course with representatives from one of the local police force in Durham. And I sat with their officers, and over sort of 5-6 weeks of the various training we undertook together, I was able to really challenge their views and get them to acknowledge a different world of this, and to actually then sit with them, show them on my phone a documentary I did with the BBC, talk about LSD, talk about the fact I still use LSD, and they didn't blink an eye. They didn't then go to criminalize me. They didn't go to discriminate against me. And so I want to live in a world where if I'm walking down the street smoking a joint, the only reason a cop would interact with me is if going, "You're near a school, man." Sorry, obviously, yeah. It should be consumed in the same way that cigarettes are. That we should allow. It should be dealt with it's like a faux pas. It's not a criminal issue. If the person is doing it with no detrimental effect to themselves or society, it should be almost like, that sounds very authoritarian, but
I think we need to, bring a degree of pragmatism in here. Yeah. The vast majority of police officers will treat people compassionately and tolerant. Some may arrest you for the LSDs, others may not, but they will all probably deal with you in one way or another. But to like we've seen, blow smoke in a copper's face, is not exactly the best way to get him on board. So what I would say is that people need a touch of pragmatism, and not to take the piss, basically.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. It should be a question of etiquette. I mean, I didn't grow up in the days, but I remember being told sort of things of a cop would sort of clip a kid sort of thing, and they'd be like, and then they go to the parent would go, oh, they'd be told what was sort of done, and there would be a system of punishment, as it were, and then the child kind of learns from that interaction, and it's actually the police is an authority figure to be respected, not someone to be feared. Whereas I think a lot of the youth have grown up, and I managed to sort of have a desensitized interaction with the police, because often they were coming for domestic incidences. They were coming because of my mental health as a child. So I was dealt with under mental health rather than any criminalization. So I think that allowed me to develop a different relationship with police. But I still panic every time I see a blue light. I've got to then think, what am I carrying? What am I doing? Where am I? You know what I mean? It's a weird sort of psychology that has been inflicted on millions of people. And not only that, there is a growing body of the idea of PTSD within the force, within the idea of domestic violence being quite high amongst police officers and prison officers. So then we're seeing everyone's a victim to this on all sides. So how do we have a parley? How do we have a ceasefire? Because if the politicians are going to drag the heels 4 years to 4 years to 4 years, how do we get it so that the people serving the people are actually serving them and not harming them?
Well, what we've been doing for the last 5 years, we have moved things forward. The conversations have moved forward. We continue to have the conversations. Obviously, a new breed of police officers are joining the force. They're a lot more compassionate and tolerant. The training is better. I can't really see, a big bang answer to the questions you're asking, to be honest.
Yeah, it's incremental change, I think, and it's one of the things I've had to accept, because as I say, I'm quite a radicalist. I have a grand vision for the future world that I hope to live in, and I'm quite happy to put in my time and effort
there is absolutely nothing wrong in pushing the boat out as far as you can, yeah. But then I think you might have to roll back and compromise. But at least by rowing it all the way, you don't have to roll it all the way back. You just roll it all back a certain distance, yeah.
Yeah,
that's what I would suggest you do.
No,
anyway,
can I ask? Sorry, can I ask you one more question, sir, before you go and we'll wrap this up?
Yeah.
Sweet. It's a bit more soft-hearted one. It's what we usually finish on with all our guests. There's a couple of questions we didn't get through today, unfortunately, but again, it's a nice excuse to have you back on in the not too distant future. The final question is just, what does the future hold for you now? You've retired. I see you're traveling a lot, obviously, but you seem quite a passionate and informed man.
I'm up in Scotland loads, but I'm also doing. I'm a trustee with Kaleidoscope, which is the main drug charity operating in Wales. I'm also a trustee for Chester Aid to Homelessness. So I crossed the border into Cheshire to help them out with homelessness, and it's good to see, how different governments deal with homelessness and the support they provide. But also, I'm interested in the link between homelessness and problematic drug use. And also these daft rules, that people can't consume substances in hostels and stuff like this.
Yeah.
If people who are addicted to substances can't consume them in hostels, then they're never going to get off the streets, are they?
Yeah, exactly. There's so much backward within. It's not even intentional. It was just stuff that sort of manifested of stacking these backward policies on top of each other. So it's great to see that you're going to commit your time to being able to help the I suppose the victims of the war on drugs, because a lot of them will be.
Yeah, well, I'm any lobbying of politicians, whether it's in England, Scotland, or Wales, then I'm happy to do so, and I got a few irons in the fire in that direction. But I think the current campaign is to bring crack pipes under the Misuse of Drugs Act, so we can provide more harm reduction to users. It's a nonsense that is not included in the regulations. So I think that's what I'm going to try and do next.
Excellent. Well, best of luck to you. Thank you very much for giving us your time this evening.
All right.
Thank you very much, folks, for listening to us. As always, you can check us out on patreon.com, where you can help us keep the lights on this little project of ours. Check us out on all social media platforms at simpalife.com. I've been Simpa, he's been Magga, and our wonderful guest this evening has been Arfon Jones. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
All right. Peace.
Bye.
Cheers.